The halls of Harrenhal were always cold. Even in the height of summer, the ruined fortress carried the chill of old ghosts, a place where the dead whispered in the walls. Arya Stark knew this now, having spent weeks as a ghost herself, nameless, hidden, watching. The girl named Weasel, then Nymeria, then no one at all. She gripped the small piece of parchment in her hand, feeling the ink smudge under her fingers. The list was always changing, but some names never left. Cersei Lannister, Joffrey Baratheon, Tywin Lannister, Tywin. The man who sat at the long table in the main hall poring over maps and letters, sending his armies to crush her brother, giving orders that meant death for thousands. The man who looked through her as if she was nothing, because to him, she was nothing. Her heart pounded as she made her way through the dark corridors, searching for the only man in this cursed place who could help her, Jaqen H'ghar. She found him at the well, washing his hands as if rinsing away unseen blood. His strange, mismatched eyes met hers, and he smiled, tilting his head. "A girl seeks Jaqen H'ghar once more," he murmured. "Does she have another name for the Red God?" Arya swallowed. Her pulse thrummed in her ears. She had given him 2 names. All others had been easy. But this one? This was different. This was the Lion of Lannister. The one man who held all the power. The man who commanded armies. Still, she forced the words out. Tywin Lannister. Jaqen blinked, his expression unreadable. A lion is a dangerous prey. This one must be careful. A girl is certain? Arya nodded, her fingers clenching. She would not take it back. Jaqen smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. A debt will be paid. That night, Arya could barely sleep. Her mind swam with thoughts of what she had just done. She had named Tywin Lannister the most powerful man in Westeros for death. If Jaqen succeeded, it would change everything. Robb could win the war. The Lannisters would be thrown into chaos. She lay in the dark, staring at the cracked ceiling of the servants' quarters, listening to the distant sounds of men laughing, boots echoing in the halls, the occasional scream from the dungeons below. Would it happen tonight? Tomorrow? How would Jaqen do it? In the morning, nothing seemed different. Tywin still sat at a table, surrounded by his lords and captains. Arya refilled goblets and poured wine, watching him carefully, expecting at any moment for him to choke, to fall forward, to clutch at his throat and collapse. But nothing happened. Days passed. Tywin remained alive. Arya grew impatient. She found Jaqen in the shadows behind the stables. He stood with his back against the stone, his arms folded. When he saw her, he tilted his head. A girl is impatient. "You haven't done it," Arya said, keeping her voice low. "A man must be careful. Lions do not fall so easily." Arya clenched her fists. "You killed Whis fast enough. And Amory Lorch. A man does what he can, when he can," Jaqen said. "A lion is surrounded by other lions. The Red God demands patience." Arya wanted to scream at him, but she bit her tongue. That night, she heard whispers in the halls. Tywin was sick. Some said it was bad food. Others claimed he had been poisoned. Arya's heart leapt in her chest. Had Jaqen done it? Had he already struck? But when morning came, Tywin was alive. Pale, tired-looking, but alive. He sat at his usual place, issuing orders. If Jaqen had made an attempt, he had failed. Arya searched for him again. This time, she found him near the armory, sharpening a blade. "You said you would do it," she said. Jaqen sighed. "A man is trying. Try harder." He studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "A girl has many names. Perhaps she has one more." Arya's breath caught. She had only one name left to give, one more death. But no, she would not waste it. She shook her head. "Just kill Tywin." Jaqen nodded. That night, Tywin Lannister died. The news spread through Harrenhal like wildfire. Lord Tywin Lannister was dead. Arya woke to the sound of shouting, hurried footsteps, and the clanking of armor. She shot up from her cot in the servants' quarters, heart pounding. The air was thick with tension. Servants whispered in hushed, panicked voices. Soldiers moved through the halls in a frenzy. She hurried to the great hall, slipping between the gathering crowd. There, at the long wooden table, Tywin Lannister's lifeless body lay slumped forward. His face was gray, his mouth slightly open, as if frozen mid-command. A goblet of wine lay spilled beside him. Dark red liquid staining the maps of Westeros spread across the table. Just kill Tywin. Jaqen nodded. That night, Tywin Lannister died. The news spread through Harrenhal like wildfire. Lord Tywin Lannister was dead. Arya woke to the sound of shouting, hurried footsteps, and the clanking of armor. She shot up from her cot in the servants' quarters, heart pounding. The air was thick with tension. Servants whispered in hushed, panicked voices. Soldiers moved through the halls in a frenzy. She hurried to the great hall, slipping between the gathering crowd. There, at the long wooden table, Tywin Lannister's lifeless body lay slumped forward. His face was gray, his mouth slightly open, as if frozen mid-command. A goblet of wine lay spilled beside him. Dark red liquid staining the maps of Westeros spread across the table. Poison, someone muttered. An assassination, another whispered. Lords and knights shouted over one another. Kevan Lannister, Tywin's loyal brother, stood at the head of the room, his face twisted in shock and fury. "Who did this?" he roared. "Find them! Tear this castle apart if you must." Panic gripped Arya, but beneath it, something else stirred satisfaction. He was dead. Tywin Lannister was dead, but she couldn't celebrate. Not yet. She had seen what happened when powerful men died. The wolves came. The lions turned on each other. And now, without their leader, the Lannisters would be desperate, unpredictable, and dangerous. That night, Harrenhal was locked down. No one was allowed to leave. The soldiers searched every room, every corridor. Arya kept her head down, doing her duties as if nothing had changed. But she knew she had to get out soon. She found Jaqen in the shadows of the courtyard, standing calmly, as if the entire castle wasn't in chaos around him. "It is done," he said. She swallowed. "How?" "A man has his ways." His lips curled into a small smile. "A lion drinks deep when he believes himself safe. The poisoned wine. Jaqen must have done it somehow, slipped into the kitchens, changed a cup, unseen and unnoticed." Arya exhaled. It was over. But then she felt the weight of her own actions settling in. She had changed the game. The war was different now. "Now what?" she asked. "Now," Jaqen said, "a girl must leave before the wolves come." She didn't need to be told twice. Hundreds of miles away, in the heart of King's Landing, Cersei Lannister's world collapsed. The Raven arrived before dawn, its message short and brutal. "Lord Tywin Lannister is dead, assassinated in Harrenhal." She read it over and over again, her hands trembling. The cup of wine in her fingers slipped, shattering against the floor. Tywin was the rock that held House Lannister together. Without him, without his mind, his strategy, his power, they were vulnerable. Joffrey stormed into the chamber minutes later. "Mother, what is it?" Cersei could barely speak. "Your grandfather is dead." The boy king blinked, his mouth twitching. Then he scowled. "Who did it?" Cersei clenched her fists. "I don't know, but we will burn them for it." Her mind raced. Who would do this? Stannis? The Starks? One of their own? But it didn't matter. King's Landing would not survive this. The war had just changed. The castle was a storm of rage and confusion. Lannister soldiers scoured every hall, dragging out servants, interrogating knights, torturing prisoners. No one was safe. Arya kept her head down, scrubbing floors, carrying jugs of water, pretending to be nothing more than a nameless girl. But she knew it was only a matter of time before someone looked too closely. The Freys were on edge. The Lannister bannermen whispered among themselves. Roose Bolton watched it all with cold, calculating eyes. Arya found Jaqen by the eastern tower, leaning casually against the stone as if nothing in the world could touch him. "A girl must leave now," he said, "before the hounds find her scent." She nodded. "Will you come with me?" Jaqen tilted his head. "A man has his own road." "Where will you go?" He smiled, the same mysterious smile he always wore. "To the free city, perhaps? Or to death? It is all the same." Arya hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the iron coin he had given her. "Valar Morghulis," she whispered. Jaqen's smile widened. "Valar Dohaeris." And then, just like that, he was gone. Arya did not wait. She moved quickly through the servant tunnels, past the kitchens, past the dungeons. She had to get out before they started killing people. She stole a horse from the stables and rode into the night. Harrenhal faded into the darkness behind her. She had no destination, no plan, but she was free, for now. The news of Tywin's death reached Riverrun within a week. Robb Stark sat in the war room with his bannermen when the Raven arrived. Catelyn was there too, her fingers gripping the edge of the table as the words sank in. Tywin Lannister was dead. Robb's breath came slow and steady, but inside, his heart pounded. This changed everything. He was their war leader, Great John Umber said, slamming a fist against the table. Without him, the Lannisters will crumble. "They'll fall apart," Edmure added. "Joffrey is a child, Cersei is a fool, and Tyrion is clever," Roose Bolton said, his voice smooth and cold. "But clever men do not win wars alone." Catelyn exhaled, a mix of relief and worry on her face. "Robb, this is an opportunity. You could strike now, while they're weak." He knew she was right. Without Tywin, the Lannisters had no true commander. Kevin might try to lead, but he didn't command the same fear and respect. But Robb also knew the game was not over. The Lannisters were wounded, but a wounded lion was still dangerous. "What of Harrenhal?" he asked. "Who holds it now?" "Roose Bolton," Rickard Karstark answered. Robb frowned. He trusted Bolton as little as he trusted the Freys. He would have to be careful. For now, though, one thing was clear. This was his chance to turn the war. Cersei stood before the Iron Throne, her hands clenched into fists. The court was in chaos. The news of Tywin's death had shaken the foundations of power. Lords whispered behind her back. The small council bickered. "Whoever did this must be found," Kevin Lannister said, his voice strained with grief and fury. This was no accident. Varys remained quiet, his expression unreadable. Littlefinger smirked as if he were already planning how to profit from the disaster. Joffrey sat on the throne, his face twisted in anger. "We should burn Harrenhal to the ground," he shouted. "Kill them all." Cersei forced herself to breathe. "That would serve nothing," she said through gritted teeth. Tyrion leaned forward. "The question we should be asking is, who benefits from this?" Silence fell over the chamber. Cersei's mind raced. The Starks, the Tyrells, Stannis? Whoever had done this had thrown House Lannister into chaos. And chaos, she realized, was exactly what her enemies wanted. The walls of the Red Keep had always echoed with whispers. But now those whispers carried a new tone: fear, uncertainty, and the scent of blood in the air. Cersei could feel the cracks forming beneath her feet. Tywin had held their house together with an iron grip, and now that grip had been severed. Kevin Lannister stood at the head of the small council, trying to assert control. "We must focus on stability," he said. "King's Landing must be secure before the wolves and the stag take advantage." "Let them come," Joffrey sneered. "I'll put Robb Stark's head on a spike next to his father's." Tyrion pinched the bridge of his nose. "Yes, that's a brilliant strategy, Your Grace. Let's invite all our enemies to march on us at once." Cersei barely listened. Her mind was running through the possibilities. The Tyrells were watching carefully, waiting to see if the Lannisters would collapse. The Martells still simmered with old vengeance. Stannis had lost at Blackwater, but he was still out there, still a threat. And without Tywin, who commanded the army. She turned to Kevan. "Will you lead the war effort?" Her uncle hesitated. "I will do what must be done." Cersei could already see the problem. Kevan was no Tywin. He was competent, but he lacked the ruthlessness, the sheer force of will that Tywin had wielded like a blade. She needed another plan, and there was only one option. She had to ensure Tyrion would fail. He was too clever, too careful. She could not let him fill their father's void, which meant, one way or another, Tyrion Lannister had to be removed. In Riverrun, the northern lords were divided. Some argued for caution. Others urged Robb to march now, while the Lannisters were weak. Roose Bolton, as always, watched and waited. "A lion with a broken leg still has fangs," he said. Robb nodded, considering his options. He had two paths before him: strike at King's Landing before the Lannisters could regroup, secure the Riverlands and Harrenhal, cutting off the Lannisters completely. "Tywin is dead," Edmure Tully said. "The war changes now. We should push south." Robb shook his head. "We don't have the numbers to take King's Landing, not yet, but we can take the Riverlands completely. We can force them into a siege they can't afford." The plan was set. Robb would move against Harrenhal, cutting off the Lannister hold in the Riverlands. But even as he spoke, Roose Bolton remained silent, calculating. And Arya Stark was already out there, somewhere, moving toward her own fate. Arya rode through the woods, her heart pounding. She was free of Harrenhal, but she was still alone, still hunted. She had changed the war, but no one knew it was her. She could go north to Robb. She could go east to Braavos. But something in her told her that none of those were the right path, not yet. She still had names on her list, and she still had unfinished business. The war had changed, and so had she. The ripples of Tywin Lannister's death spread across Westeros like wildfire. No one could predict what would come next, but one thing was certain: the war was no longer the same. Robb Stark moved swiftly. With Tywin gone, the Lannister forces in the Riverlands were weaker, their command fractured. The Golden Lion still roared, but it was bleeding. Harrenhal was his first target. Roose Bolton, holding the castle in the Lannister name, sent a raven to Robb, offering a peaceful transfer of power. "Harrenhal is yours, your grace," his letter read. "The war favors the north." But Robb hesitated. Roose had always been too cold, too calculating. Something about the offer felt wrong. His mother, Catelyn, urged caution. "Bolton is no fool. He would not hand you Harrenhal without something in return." But Robb could not afford to delay. He accepted the offer and moved his forces into the castle, placing Bolton under careful watch. Little did he know, Roose Bolton had already made another deal. Cersei's grip on power was slipping. Without Tywin, Joffrey was uncontrollable. The small council was divided. Tyrion was trying to keep things together, but his influence was fading. And then the Tyrells made their move. Margaery Tyrell had already wrapped Joffrey around her finger, but now her grandmother, Lady Olenna, began to sink her claws into the kingdom itself. "The Lannisters need allies," Olenna told Cersei over a quiet supper, "and my family is more than willing to provide them. But in return, we expect more consideration." Cersei seethed. The Tyrells were circling like vultures. She needed to act. Tyrion was a threat. He had too much power, too much cleverness. If she could turn Joffrey against him completely, she could remove him from the game. But her biggest fear wasn't Tyrion. It was Stannis Baratheon. Tywin had been the only reason Stannis had failed at Blackwater. Without him, what was stopping him from trying again? Cersei clenched her fists. She needed to prepare for war, and more importantly, she needed to strike before her enemies did. Arya Stark had no home, no direction, only a list. And one name burned in her mind: the Mountain. Gregor Clegane had butchered her friends, tortured innocents, and slaughtered her family's bannermen. He was still at Harrenhal when she fled, but she knew it wouldn't be long before he was sent elsewhere. She had changed the war with Tywin's death. Now, she would change it again. She tightened her grip on the dagger she had stolen. "The North remembers," she whispered, and she would not stop until her enemies were dead. Robb Stark sat in the great hall of Harrenhal, his mind racing with strategy. Tywin Lannister was gone, and the war was finally turning in his favor. His bannermen urged him to march south. "Strike at the heart while they are weak," Great Jon Umber growled. "Let us take King's Landing and end this war." But Robb knew better. He had fought enough battles to understand the cost of arrogance. King's Landing was still heavily defended. The Lannister bannermen, leaderless though they were, had not yet fallen apart. "We solidify our position first," he said. "We control the Riverlands. We push their forces back to the Westerlands. And then we take the throne." But there was one flaw in his plan: Roose Bolton. Robb did not trust him. His mother did not trust him. And yet, Bolton remained at his side, ever watchful, ever patient. And as the banners of the North flew over Harrenhal, a quiet message was already on its way to the Dreadfort. A message that would seal Robb Stark's fate. Cersei Lannister was many things vain, cruel, ruthless, but she was not a fool. She knew that House Lannister was teetering on the edge of collapse. Kevan could not hold them together. Tyrion was dangerous. The Tyrells were circling. And Stannis was coming. The Red Priestess had seen it in her fires. King's Landing would burn, and only fire and blood would remain. Cersei would not allow it. She needed an advantage. And so, in the dead of night, she sent a raven to Walder Frey. Frey had been humiliated by Robb Stark. Their alliance had been shattered. Their pride wounded. "What do you want?" Walder's response was blunt, filled with bitter rage. "The king in the north," Cersei replied. "Dead. The trap was set." Arya rode through the woods with only one goal: to find the mountain. She had left Harrenhal behind, but her vengeance burned hotter than ever. Gregor Clegane was one of the worst monsters in Westeros. She had seen him flay men alive, laugh as they screamed, butcher helpless prisoners for sport. Now she would make him pay. Disguised as a common boy, she followed a group of sellswords through the Westerlands, listening, learning. And finally she heard the words she had been waiting for. "The mountain rides west," one of them muttered. Summoned back to the rock, Arya clenched her fists. She had changed the war once. She would do it again. One way or another, Gregor Clegane was going to die. The raven reached the twins, but Walder Frey did not send an immediate response. He read Cersei's letter twice, then thrice. He wanted Robb Stark dead. There was no question about that. The young wolf had insulted him, broken his word, and shamed his house. But killing him at a wedding? That was Tywin Lannister's plan. And Tywin was dead. Without Tywin's promise of gold, protection, and rewards, Walder hesitated. He did not trust Cersei. She was too reckless, too desperate. He knew if he betrayed the Starks now, he would stand alone. And Walder Frey was no fool. So, when Robb's envoys arrived, seeking reconciliation, Walder accepted. House Stark and House Frey still had tensions, but there was no massacre. The Red Wedding never happened. Instead, Robb Stark secured the Riverlands and turned his full attention south. And the Lannisters? They were still bleeding. Without Tywin, the Lannisters were weaker than they had ever been. Stannis knew it. He gathered his forces and struck swiftly, his fleet moving under cover of darkness. The fire of Blackwater had wounded him, but he had learned from his mistakes. This time, there was no wildfire to stop him. By the time King's Landing saw the banners of the Baratheons stag on the horizon, it was too late. The city fell in a single night. Joffrey screamed and sobbed as Stannis' men dragged him from the throne. Cersei tried to flee but was captured. The streets burned, and the Lannister banners were torn down. By dawn, Stannis Baratheon sat on the Iron Throne. Tyrion disappeared into the shadows, vanishing from the city before he could be executed. Kevan Lannister was killed in battle. Jaime Lannister, still a prisoner of the Starks, never even made it back to defend his family. And Cersei, she drank the poison herself rather than be taken prisoner. House Lannister was broken. Gregor Clegane was a hard man to kill. Arya had followed his trail for weeks, slipping between war camps and battlefields, watching and waiting. She had only one weapon, a single dose of poison, the same poison that had killed Tywin Lannister. And one night, in the ruins of a burned-out village, she struck. Gregor sat by the fire, drinking from his cup, laughing at some cruel joke. Arya moved through the shadows, unseen, unheard. When she emerged, she was no longer the girl from Winterfell. She was death itself. And as the mountain fell, gasping, choking on his own blood, she whispered, "The North remembers." Gregor Clegane died with fear in his eyes. Arya rode away before the body was cold. She had killed a lion, and she would kill again. With the Lannisters shattered, the war was over. Robb Stark held the North and the Riverlands. He was undefeated in battle. He could march on King's Landing, but there was no need. Stannis ruled now. The two kings met in the burned-out halls of the Red Keep. "You are my father's true heir," Robb said, "but I am the North." Stannis studied him for a long time. Then, slowly, he nodded. "The North will be free," he said, "but Westeros is mine." A pact was made, and the war was finally over. Robb Stark was crowned king in the North, ruler of an independent North. Sansa Stark escaped to Winterfell, no longer a hostage of the Lannisters. Bran and Rickon returned home, safe from Theon's betrayal. Jon Snow remained with the Night's Watch, unaware that his destiny was far greater. And Arya Stark? Arya did not return home. She had names left on her list. And death was not done with her yet, because Arya Stark had changed the game. Tywin Lannister had fallen, and Westeros would never be the same again.